This is the Content Strategy Insights podcast, episode number 115. It's common to joke about ADHD, dyslexia, and similar neurological conditions. But as content designers, and as design professionals in general, we need to think seriously about them. Research shows that at least 20% of the population exhibits one or more of these types of neurodivergence. To learn more, listen in on this conversation with Katrin Suetterlin, a content architect and an expert on designing for neurodivergent populations.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 115 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I am really happy today to have with us my friend Katrin Suetterlin from Germany. She's a senior content architect at WeFox, which is an insurance technology company in Germany. Welcome, Katrin. Tell the folks a little bit more about what you do there at WeFox.
Hello. Yeah, I'm basically doing what I've been doing all my life, which is kind of writing and making things better for others, because I'm a user myself and I experience the world a little bit differently. And I want to make it better and more inclusive for everyone. So WeFox does InsurTech, which means we try to digitalize all the steps of insurance, which is something that is a lot about trust. So you have to choose your words wisely. And also about structuring and building blocks of information that you don't overwhelm people. So that's my main goal that I want to achieve there as a UX content architect. And that's why I call myself that, because I got the inspiration from you, Larry, when we talked back in the day. I think it's a great concept, and I saw your talks a lot. And I think it's also with the house metaphor, we are building a house where people can experience things in. That might be a user, that might be a patient, that might be a candidate for a job hiring process, and still it's a user experience world where we design the digital interactions. And I've been a writer 15 years and ongoing, and I've been in UX over 5 years because the digital aspect of writing was always my main goal. And I achieved that over some twists and turns in my CV. I was a teacher for German, and I also love to empower people and be an advocate for certain topics.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the way you just said that, you identify as a writer, but you also said a lot of design stuff in there. So do you equally identify as a designer and a writer at this point?
Yes.
Or? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's it. I think if you are looking at spaces and you are only looking at the words, you're doing something wrong. No offense, but if you only have an Excel sheet and you don't know whether your words will be going up or down or bottom or left in the UI, or which colors are used, will this be fine for a colorblind person? Then I have to put in my veto and say, no, please don't do that, because I'm still also on the design team and my experience might not supersede the others, but maybe I know a little bit of information that is helpful to make this accessible for everyone. And so we don't have much bad user feedback.
Yeah. And I know one of the populations that you're really concerned with, and that's what I want to talk about today, is folks with neurodivergent capabilities. So tell the folks, I know that's a new term to a lot of people. I think there are other terms like dyslexia and things like that people are more familiar with. But could you tell us what neurodivergence is, how neurodivergent people experience the web?
Yeah, I would love to, Larry. And I love that you said capabilities, because we are not speaking about impairments per se, because it's not just a difference in ways of experience life. You just have a different brain. You are either born with it or you have acquired neurodiversity, which can also happen during an accident, and you have brain trauma and your brain will be forever altered. But also traumatic experiences like 2-year-long migration or tsunami or fleeing another country are ingrained in your brain and change the wires in your brain. But mostly neurodiversity came into this realm by referring to dyscalculia, dyslexia, dyspraxia, which is verbal skills and motor skills. Then there's also ADHD. People in the US listening to this will be quite familiar with everything with ADD and ADHD, but in Germany or in Europe in general, it's not as vast of a knowledge. So people will still have the little boy bias about ADHD, which is just not true. And whenever I will refer to neurodivergent individuals in this talk, I will want to say that I always mean all genders, but gender is still a binary construct in many places in the world. And so, for example, and just getting back to that, ADHD is presenting much differently in female socialized individuals than it does in male individuals, because society raised you mostly in our age. It's a boy or girl, and the third gender has been officially like gotten into law in Germany and in other places in the world, but still you are kind of put into certain kind of clothes, or with you are just addressed differently. And that just means that people that are female identified will have a much harder time living with ADHD or autism, because it is still labeled for men and boys. So you don't get treatment, you maybe even don't get diagnoses, and then you're just like maybe lost like a paper bag in the wind. And the others, I just want to quickly wrap it up, is that you also have the parts of depression or Tourette syndrome, and then you go into the parts where there is a high overlap with highly sensitive people, which is a term used mostly for people that have sensory issues, or there are a little bit of sensitive to lighting or to noises. Like you are in a canteen and you can only hear the metal of the forks clipping and clapping. And I have that problem. And that is an auditory sensory issue where you are just not capable of being someone else than you have been born with that brain. And it can be the same with pain. It can be the feeling of clothes against your skin. It can be temperature. I'm always freezing. I did not know that this was part of my own neurodivergency until very recently, because I'm digging through the research, and people like doctors or professionals hardly know anything about this overlap with the highly sensitive stigma or whatever. So just to say all of this in once, it is something that makes you just in all of your senses and the way your brain works different from the neurotypical people that don't experience that. And if you grow up as a child and you're not diagnosed, you can imagine, Larry, that you think first you think everyone is the same as you, and once you realize it's not the case, this is already hard for you. But even harder is once the others realize that you are different, and the bullying starts or the calling names starts for autistic people. It's so hard to not get overwhelmed. So in general, this is a neurodivergence life where you have to either first acknowledge it yourself, or others are putting the label on you, or they are even going after you for being different, because it shows, and you just can't help it until you can help it by masking and trying to be like all of the others. And this is very painful as well.
No, that whole situation you just described, there's so much in there, like the fact that it's a span, that it's not like a binary.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's a spectrum, yeah. But also the fact that it's not immediately obvious to people, like a blind person with a cane, or a deaf person, who's using sign language, or something like that. So, and you mentioned a lot of things in there. There's so much that's kind of physical, but a lot of that manifests in the design of these digital experiences that we're all crafting. Yes. Let's focus in on that. Like, tell me, like, how are there analogies, for example, to that highly sensitive person? Like, I'm picturing like a wall of text that might bother somebody, like bothers me, can you talk a little bit about that? Like how focusing through that lens of digital experience?
Absolutely. I attend most of the text help seminars. They are from the UK, I think. They do a lot about accessibility and UX and the writing of content to really speak to all of the users you might be addressing, or the audience that you chose as your target group, so to speak. The thing is that every little thing in there that I mentioned, ADHD and also dyslexia, has a spectrum of its own. Like, we know that about Asperger's, and I will correct this because Asperger is a rather controversial person, and it's now called autism, and really not the former name anymore. I learned that from a Netflix series called Atypical, which also is a great resource for getting to know the world of a autistic male identifying teenager, which is amazing. It's really lovely and funny, and has great presentation of that. I spoke to other autists or to autistic people that can really see themselves, but many can not see themselves in representations like this. And this will always be the same way. You cannot be represented by all of the UX professionals because we are so many and we are so different. And so when dyslexia, for example, is addressed, they say this wall of text that you just mentioned. But dyslexia comes in many shapes and sizes, just like colorblindness, like you mentioned, the permanent disability or impairment of vision. It's similar. You just have to look out for your typography. Yeah, you have to use sans serif. You have to check the width between the letters. And you might not go under 12 pixel if possible for your typeface. The size is very important as well. But I found out the hard way about that when I know that. And I published an article about neurodiversity, about my research on Medium. And it got picked up. And I was happy that it was amplified and more people got to know about it. But the publication that picked it up had serif typeface. So someone wrote a comment, this is not accessible at all. This is not a great example of an accessible article for neurodivergent people. And I was so taken aback because they're right. And I didn't check. And I was like, okay, that's another learning. So basically, you cannot always do everything right, but you can aim to look for the right way to design experiences. And that's why my research was about, which I stated in this article. And since then, of course, the publication doesn't change their typeface, but you can still read it. If I take it back and I make it my own again, then I'm the author and can make the typeface exactly that is readable and enjoyable for everyone. But of course, as every platform has, there are restrictions and there are constraints that I cannot change. And so I have to search for something that is truly accessible. And this is a journey. We are all on a path. We never will reach the goal in our lifetime, I suppose. But that's, something I learned about that in my research for neurodiversity and UX design, or UX content, especially with words.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, that typography, that's something that's often out of control for the individual content designer.
Mm-hmm.
But depending on your setup, you might be working with the design folks who are making those decisions. But what can you do? Say you're in a position where you, like that publication you mentioned, where they didn't change the font, even after you identified that. How can you, as a content designer, craft words? Like, what can you do with that constraint to still make it as accessible as possible to someone, with dyslexia or similar?
Mm-hmm. So the research I'm referring to is a Typeform survey, very short, 8 questions, and 4 are optional. So it only makes up for 4 questions. And I would love you to put the link in the show notes so that people still can answer that, because it's an ongoing research and it's not used for anything like a census or like taking note for corporation or something. It's just for me to learn about me and getting there to make a better decision every day, every time, like you mentioned, with every stakeholder. So in this research, just quickly, 60% were self-identifying with neurodiversity. 45% were advocates of neurodiversity. So this is, you can have multiple answers. And 33 work with neurodiverse people. So it's also something that is for the realm of the workplace and the HR situation and how you make people more at ease with what's bothering them. So this is the first one. And when you're asking me, then I just think from my research, it shows avoid the walls of text, break up the content into digestible pieces, which also means making choices for visuals that are the so-called like separators of those content blocks. Try to make it readable, like with the typeface I just mentioned, and try to make it also contrast wise enough of a contrast so everyone can access it. This is like the one-on-one of accessibility, of course. In the US, you have laws for that. In Germany, it just came out for digital spaces, but it still has a long way to go. And I was so impressed with another, the other day I saw a web page where you could adjust for people with photosensitive issues. You could take out all the videos or the autoplay, which is amazing. Then they had an ADHD version where you could click on it and it was less distracting. And I was like, this is so easy and this is so fun. And people are really getting into this. It was a German webpage for football club where I live. And I was impressed because someone apparently told them it would be nice to make it accessible because your stadium that you're building new right now is also accessible. There's a place for the wheelchair people. There may be, like you said, with the cane, walking impairments, but also vision impairments. Maybe you get a better seat that you can watch the game more perfectly as you wish. So basically in general, like you said, design is about making it as accessible, but also enjoyable for those people. Because, for example, if you are in hyperfocus, this is an ADHD example, then you might get distracted by the details. And this webpage just takes it away with one click. You might miss out on something, but then again, you're not distracted anymore. And I hope that they are doing user tests, which you were also, the question is also leading there, where you ask the audience, that you ask a diverse panel of the audience. And if you are, for example, again, someone with autism, maybe that everything blends together as with the dyslexia. This could be the same. There can be overlaps between the neurodivergencies. Then just try to make it not as big of a wall of text and maybe make it more sustainable and digestible, and also reduce your bounce rates. Because, for example, with ADHD, if they have another impulse and they see something else on your page, they might abandon the cart and there goes your conversion. And then you have the drop-off rate of like in the thousands and you never know why, but maybe you have an influencer in a YouTube clip where you provided on the same page and they just left your website and never came back because they forgot. And this is the magic of finding out what neurodivergent people are seeking for with their capabilities. As you mentioned it, it's not a superpower. It's just another way of wiring in your brain. And if we design for that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, and a couple of things you just said. One thing I'm really curious about now is the prevalence of neurodivergence. Like, do you have a feel for like what percentage of the population would fit in that category? Or
yeah, I did research for you, just fresh research from the get-go, because of course numbers change all the time. But globally, you can say that there is 1 in 5 people that is a diagnosed.
Wow!
And hear that in that sentence: a diagnosed neurodivergent person, which means how much more would there be, like from the 80s when I was born, from further before that, when people were just too occupied with a world war going on and you didn't test for that, and people were just killing themselves because, trigger warning, suicidal. It's just something that makes you so desperate if it's not treated, because like if you're an outcast, it could easily lead to like not being part of the cultural life anymore, the social life. You never know. And so basically it's 20% And those are only the 20% that know of that. And as I mentioned with the example with the genders, if you take the binary gender construct, and women are largely undiagnosed, and now it's getting out in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s, they just, because of course war trauma also causes that if you stick to Germany or to Europe. But then again, it's really not overdiagnosed, because maybe this is the point in time where I can tell you and the listeners, it's a cliche and it's not true that it's overdiagnosed. It's just mislabeled as a way of saying, oh, I'm a little bit of ADHD, or I'm autistic because I need to take this route to the mailbox or something, or that I need to turn the key 3 times. And then they are making fun of the autistic traits that they might have. It's not an autistic trait that you have. It's an autistic like or presenting way of doing things, because, for example, liking a certain fork to eat your meal or something. That can be if you're an autistic person, but if you're not, then it's just an autistic presenting trait, for example. Mm-hmm. It's not maybe the completely perfect psychological expression that I'm using, because I'm just making up as I go. But in general, to answer your question, it's like 20%. And I also want to mention that those 20% are not the slackers and the losers and the finishing last kind of people in any kind of community. They are not the greatest of them all either, because most of the time you mentioned like famous people like Simone Biles, for example. She recently dropped out of the Olympics due to her mental health, and prior to that, she said that she has ADHD. They achieve a lot because they can really focus in on training, but it's not that alone, because there's still so much more than their diagnoses or their traits for ADHD. So basically, I think the number is much larger. And what I was aiming at is that I once got told, oh, our audience cannot be neurodiverse because they are high achieving professionals that have money and they are CEOs. And I was like, have you ever looked at Elon Musk? Like,
yeah.
Can you do 180 hours a week without being some kind of differently wired? Not that everyone is a genius that has a neurodivergency, but it is possible to be anything and anyone. And it's just the way you're brought up or how you have been helped or not helped and supported that leads you to a way of living your best life or something like that.
Got it. Yeah. Hey, a couple things you said. I want to stitch together a couple things you said, because you've mentioned that
yes, please.
This isn't necessarily an innate inborn thing, that it can be trauma induced. There's a lot of people on the planet in the middle of this pandemic who are currently experiencing trauma. So between that, so the fact that it can be trauma induced, and that it probably, from what you've said, I bet it's way more than 20%, like it's so easy to go undiagnosed or unidentified. That just seems to magnify the importance of it. And I guess what would be like the top things that a designer of any kind, but in particular a content designer, can do to just like I don't usually do this in this podcast, but I feel like I want to have, what's one take home that people can do tomorrow to make their content design practice better, to address, this probably really ubiquitous issue.
Yeah, that's a good one, because getting back to what you were referring to in the beginning, like the temporary, situational, and permanent impairments, this is an invisible capability or impairment, however you frame it and however your life has gone. And what you can really take home is that you maybe try to take a step back. When I heard the talk of Stephen Wakabayashi about design practice and how we could all take a step back and simplify our designs in order to make it, in his case, or Stephen talked about the accessibility for diverse crowds and for BIPOC people and for LGBTQIA plus people. So it was more about that, because that's what QT BIPOC does, where he is in this organization. And I was so stunned, because I think we could all take a step back from our design practice, because we sometimes get lost in the nice things. such as audio in the background or autoplay, or, for example, not providing closed captions. What's the deal with that? It helps everyone. It helps also the person that has gone through trauma, according to what you said with the pandemic, because they are so depressed they couldn't go outside. It doesn't mean that they are distracted or annoyed by your video, but maybe you just cut it out. Is it necessary? Yeah. Where do you put it? Has the page a scroll depth of like forever, infinity or something? Or has it just one viewpoint where you can see everything at one glance? And then for us wordsmiths, do you really have to use all that words? And I really want to make a statement about a podcast everyone should listen to after yours, which is the Minimalists podcast, which I follow. And the episode is with Amanda Montel, and she is the author of Cult-ish. And it's a book about cults, as the name says. And I was stunned as well, because every UX content person needs to listen to that. Since jargon, idioms, phrases that is hard to understand are excluding people. And I want to quote directly from my research when I asked about the biggest pain points of neurodivergent people in general, not only UX, but the workplace as well. And this person said, quote unquote, not understanding some nuances of language, especially implications that aren't metaphors or idioms, quote unquote. So
wow, that's a pretty deep level of like rhetorical composition attention that you should bring.
The podcast episode just talks about how exclusive language can be. And this is about cults and their jargon and their roles and their titles and their names and everything, which is just, it blows your mind. It's an amazing episode. And jargon is something that I want to abolish better sooner than later, like yesterday. How about that?
Right. Well, I will definitely link to that cult talk and Stephen Wakabashi's talk. Hey, one thing you just mentioned, it occurred to me that there's so many design practices that have benefits beyond the people they are designed to address, like curb cuts in sidewalks help delivery people as well as people in wheelchairs, and closed captioning, can help you if you don't have earbuds and you're in a loud coffee shop.
Yes.
Is there something analogous in accounting for neurodivergence in your design? Do you see does everybody benefit from paying attention to these considerations, do you think?
Absolutely. If you test it out in journey maps and you see the difference, if you even do, because again, people are undiagnosed walking around with neurodivergencies, you don't know and they don't know, and they just think, that's odd. What kind of button is that? And then they just give you feedback on that, and it goes directly into your feedback. So I love that you mentioned closed captions, because it's amazing for people with any kind of visual impairment, but also with dyslexia and anything that has to do with seeing numbers and letters. Like if you have a problem with that, it's amazing that you can follow the audio. And if it's the other way around, you can follow the text, or you can follow both. I just had a little conversation with a person that identifies as an autistic ADHD person, I guess. And they said they love to have an audiobook and have the real book in their hands while they listen to that audiobook, because that's the way they just get to suck everything in. And it was, funnily enough, the book Neurotribes that was referred to, which is dealing with the life of autistic people, or people with autism, however they want to label themselves. And getting back to your question, sorry, Larry, just one quick thing. If you are taking care of your parent or your kids, and you have to just the ability to listen, and maybe they are screaming in the back, how amazing is it that you have closed captions or transcript for your talk, or you have pre-recorded it, so there are no audio interferences which can be very hard to listen and to focus on for all of us, because we exhibit Zoom fatigue all over the place. Like everyone who has to work remotely has the upside and the downside. So if you have this like crickling and crackling and they're breaking up, the best talk is ruined by that maybe, but you can still have that recorded at a time where your Wi-Fi is better. And so everyone can benefit from that more. And maybe you benefit from it as well because you're not as nervous as when you are giving talks or whatever, because it's the excitement. So I think this is also, if you're hungry, if you're in a hurry, if you have to go somewhere, it always helps that you have it stripped down to the most important part. No jargon, make your sentences count, make them short, but not too short. Come across with anything that you want to say, but maybe also stay away from language that is not standard and is not used by everyone. And you will see that in your user testing if you do some.
Cool. Hey, Katrin, I can't believe it. We're already coming up on time. Is there anything
Wow.
last? Anything I know, but this is an ongoing conversation. I'm sure we'll continue it. But is there anything last that you want to make sure we share right now with the folks?
Yes, I think from the 80% UX professionals that answered my survey and the 22 who are not, they might be advocates or living with a person or relative that is neurodivergent, or they work with one in their cubicle or something. I had a little index and asking them how much they feel like they are included in the design world, especially with words, content design, UX writing, but also UX design in general. And guess what? The number was more close to 2 than it was to 5 out of 10. It was not 2 out of 5, it was 2 out of 10, which made my heart break, because I think, of course, the NPS score and emojis and this and that and numbers, it's all subjective, but they felt inclusion only to 2 from 10. That's so bad. And I want to share something that we kind of had a spark about in our preparation for this podcast. Architecture and other design practices, like, for example, interior design and everything related, for example, to a museum's experience or something, they are much more progressed in that field. And I want to share the link in the show notes for you to include about enabling spaces, which is a neurodiversity friendly living spaces and workplaces website, where you can also have simulation by the National Autistic Society from UK. What's it like to be an autistic person? And there are many great resources out there speaking about how interior design, for example, lay down a rug and it's not as loud anymore. Put some wall art up and it's not as loud anymore. Or maybe also lighting and how it affects people in the workplace. Do you want fluorescent lighting that gives people with sensory issues migraines? I don't think so. So people are really front and center with that and doing really great. Even in my school, they changed the tiles, the old school tiles made of stone, out for felt like a fabric that they changed, and it swallowed all the sound, and it was much easier for everyone not to get sick from that, because noise makes you sick, of course, and teachers got sick a lot due to the stress, so you don't need the added noise. And this is what I have at heart, that we look to other design practitioners and to other people that can inspire us. And it's out there every day and any day how people struggle, and if that struggle is necessary. So I think that's the thing I want to share, that people have to look out for.
That's fantastic. And this always happens too in these conversations. Like, now I want to have a whole talk about that. So let's have that be our next conversation, like how to apply.
Absolutely.
What other people are doing well. Hey, one very last thing, Katrin. What's the best way for people to stay in touch, to connect online or?
Yes. Yeah. So I would love to see anyone who has still open questions or anything, reach out to me on LinkedIn. The mailbox is not always open, of course, because we have to take time off as well for ourselves to be energized again. You can also, if you like, find me on Medium. It's my name, Katrin, and Suetterlin, without any things between, and then medium.com. This is where I write, but I plan to maybe release in this year also a Substack. And whenever Larry and I get to meet up in person, I will pick his brain, and afterwards I will start my own podcast maybe, but you have to look out for that because it's non-existent before. That's it basically. I would love to talk to you all and find out more about that. And if you take the survey, that would be lovely.
I'll link to all that in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
Folks have it. Yep. Well, thanks so much, Katrin. It's always fun to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.